Now that we explored loops and if statements quite a bit, let's also revisit this code for the first transaction value and let's clean it up. Would be nice if we could enter that first value within our user interface here too, and don't have that extra line of code. Now to get rid of that, we actually need to add an additional check here where we're getting the last blockchain value here. We need to check whether that value actually exists or not. And this, of course, in the end has to be done here in return blockchain -1, because this is the code that fails for an empty blockchain. So in get last blockchain value, I'll add an if statement, and I have to check the length of my blockchain list here. And if the length is smaller than 1, which means it's empty, then I don't want to return blockchain 1. So here, I can check the length with the special len function. It's a function built into Python, and we can execute it on lists. And here, I can pass blockchain as an argument, and then do a comparison. Now, I don't want to check the equal sign here. I could check if length is equal to 2, but of course, I also want to support length 3, 4, 5, and 1, and so on. So instead, I'll check if length is smaller than 1, which means it's 0 or negative. That can't really happen, but it also doesn't hurt to check this. If the length is smaller than 1, then we know it's an empty chain. And in this case, I want to return what? Now that is really up to you. You can return a string which says empty and later add a if check where you check if it's empty. You can return 0. You could return the starting value here, but that's not really very clean because your function here then assumes something about your logic of your other code, so I'm not a fan of that. I'll return a special type which we haven't learned about yet, the non type. Non simply just is used if you want to tell your program there's nothing, and sometimes this is useful. As in this case, we want to return something. We have to return something because the code where we call this function expects to get back something. But that something should also show there's nothing there. We could return false too. You could make an argument for that. But I also want to show the non-type. And this is a case where it actually makes sense. Normally, we return the element, the last element of the blockchain list. And if this doesn't exist, we return nothing. And that makes a lot of sense to me. So now we're using a different Boolean operator, the smaller than operator, the lang function, and the non-type. The if statement just works as before. Now you might wonder, why are we not putting this code here into an else block? And we could absolutely do that. This code would be perfectly fine. However, there's no need to do that. Because if we return in a function, as we do if this condition is met, we automatically quit that function. The code after it, this line here, will not execute in this case. So this line, this return blockchain -1 line, will only execute if we don't make it into that if block. So we got an implicit else case here, you could say. Either one of the two return statements execute, they can't execute together. So now we adjusted the get last blockchain value function and we're returning none if the blockchain is empty. Now we can handle that case down there. First of all, I'll remove that code where we get the initial value. And in the while block here, where I get last blockchain value, I'll change this. To be precise, I'll not change it here, but in add value. In add value here, we append our last transaction. Now we probably want to check if last transaction equals none. Because if this equals none, then I want to append a different last transaction. So then I want to set last transaction equal to 1. So to our default starting code here. That, of course, also means that we can get rid of that default argument assignment here because we're never calling that function without explicitly passing a last transaction in our code. We always do pass that get last blockchain value. But I can also leave it here so that we have it for reference. There will be other useful cases in this course where we still use default arguments, but let's keep it here too. So now I'm setting it back to this array 1 in case the last transaction is none. And then we can still append this, but now we'll safely append it. By the way, it's also important to understand none is not the same as not specifying a value as an argument. So this is why the default argument we have here, this one, doesn't handle the none case by default, because none is a type which is actually different to not passing anything. We do pass something, it's just none. It's a special type in Python. So now we adjusted this code. Let me maybe also change the name here to add transaction. It's not required, but I guess it's more in line with what we're doing here. And let's also change it down there. Let's now save that file and let's try it out. If I execute my blockchain py file and I choose add new transaction value and I enter 3.3, it actually seems to work. If I add another value, 12.12, and I then output my blockchain, you see if I scroll up, we're outputting block 1, which has the starting value dynamically entered by our function, and then the first value we entered, and we have that second block with the second value. So now this is working, and now we have a way more dynamic way of handling these blockchain values. We're now safely doing that with the help of none and our if check in getLastBlockchainValue here.